Hey guys, thanks for checking out another one of my battle reports. Unfortunate that this one was kind of another beatdown, similar to some of the other games I've played. This was actually the most one-sided game I've ever played in well over a decade of pretty active miniature wargaming. So that wasn't great, but there are some things to learn from the game, both from my perspective and some things we could talk about from the Tyranid army. So right off the bat, like I mentioned in the battle report, I want to talk about my list uh, instead of writing about it because there's some stuff to say. I originally posted this list on Daka just to get some feedback. I wanted to go with all commanders the whole time because while I like Tau and I think they're pretty competitive with certain builds, most of their units are kind of bad. Hitting on fours for a shooting army that's not a volume shooting army. So like guard hits on fours, but guard brings usually like a couple hundred guys if it's foot guard, or they hit on threes when you're playing like scions or more veterans or something like that. And then they also have orders. So orders either get you more shots, they let you reroll ones, they let you reroll ones to wound. So they have some play there. The thing that Tau do is they bring marker lights. So as you hit more marker lights onto a target, you get more bonuses. The problem is that to get the +1 ballistic skill bonus, which is what everybody wants, you have to put 5 marker lights onto a single target, and that's really hard. So the sources of marker lights that are the most common are pathfinders, marker light drones, and those are probably the two most common, honestly. Like cadre fireblades, some vehicles have them, stuff like that. But yeah, probably pathfinders and marker light drones. The problem with marker light drones is they're really squishy. There's no way to defend them other than their range, which is only 36, so it's not like they're crazy far away. And they also have poor morale, so if you take a unit of them and you lose like 2 or 3, the rest of them are probably going to run. And then Pathfinders are also very squishy, and they don't ignore the penalty for moving and shooting a heavy weapon, which the drones do. So unless they can hunker down somewhere, they are also going to be hitting on fives. So your units that you need to hit to make the rest of your army hit more pretty much hit on fives. So that's not great. The way I reasoned it is that the reroll ones to hit marker light is really easy to get. That you only have to get one, and then you could spread that out onto a bunch of different targets. So I think that's the way that Tau is going to go in the future. Getting up to like ignoring cover and the +1 ballistic skill are probably traps, and then the second marker light bonus, the seeker missiles, is pretty useless because like seeker missiles, I don't think they're that good personally. So I'd rather just focus on spreading my marker lights out to different units and being able to reroll ones with them. With that in mind, I was looking at what would work with that kind of army, and I came to commanders. Commanders are super awesome because they hit on twos, which is very few things hit on twos with shooting in 40k. It's pretty much just HQs and like assassins, really elite type single model units, stuff like that. So being able to take a lot of guys that have access to extremely powerful guns and hit on twos is really good. Like that's something that I think only Tau can do pretty much. Like even most Marine characters hit on threes and they don't have access to nearly the powerful guns that Tau do. So originally I was running this list with some different guns. I had one flamer, one burst cannon, 2 missile pods as my original copy and paste across all the commanders. And then, like I said, I posted this online. I was getting some feedback. Basically, while flamers are really good, you need to be putting out a lot of offense from the word go with this type of army. It's super elite, super shooty, so you can't just have flamers that are just kind of sitting around. And then even though a lot of the army can deep strike, because all the commanders have the ability to deep strike, they won't land within flamer range. So they're pretty much like an Overwatch or like a turn 2 and 3 consideration, where you can move up and spray down things like orcs and little bugs and the guardsmen, the chaff that most people bring. But that's just not good enough for the list. And then as it turns out, cyclic ion blasters are like almost strictly better than missile pods. So missile pods cost 6 points more, which since I had two of them on every guy, adds up really quickly. Like the dropping that to the cyclic ion blasters basically got me another commander, which is extremely good. And they have a better range than the cyclic ion blasters, but they're always strength 7. Uh, Whereas the cyclic ion blasters have the option to go up to strength 8. So when they go up to strength 8, you get D3 shots per one instead of 2 shots for a missile pod. But averages, you're going to get 2 apiece anyways, once you've kind of done the variants. And that's what I was noticing in the game is like some guys would get 3 shots, some guys would get 5, some would get 2, some would get 6, some would get 4. So it was pretty much evening out, and then that makes the math a lot more predictable. So that's exactly what I wanted. But when you don't overcharge them, they just get 3 shots straight up, and they're strength 7, which is really good. So like you're wounding Marines on 3s, you're wounding toughness 3 stuff on 2s, with an extra shot compared to a missile pod. Like those are really, really good. And then with the advanced targeting system, they're AP2 as well. So while they're not putting out the AP of something like a fusion blaster, they're still putting most vehicles onto like saving on a 5. Marines are saving on a 5 unless they're in cover, stuff like that, which is just really, really powerful. And they have such high volume that you can really come through with them. So that was a really good change. And then I switched from having 4 guns to 3 guns and advanced targeting systems because when you do the math, I'm not a big math hammer guy, but I was linked to some spreadsheets and things like that. But so when you have 3 guns and an advanced targeting system, you basically turn out to do better math against all targets except for things that have a 6+ save when your gun already has an existing AP. So like if the gun has an AP1 and you shoot something with a 6+ save, obviously the advanced targeting system doesn't do anything. Same if it's like an AP2 gun and you shoot into something with a 5+ save, etc., etc. So that was something I noticed in the game as well. With my burst cannons, I wasn't allowing the gaunts to make any kind of save. I was putting the big bugs onto 5+ save, stuff like that. So that was definitely really good, and I think that's a good way to go. It's also quite a bit of a point savings compared to buying another gun. And again, that helps me get some more guys, get some more drones, and pump that volume up a little bit, which is really powerful. For my marker lights, I just went with 2 Cadre Fireblades. Again, they hit on 2+ naturally, so they're very accurate marker lights, which is extremely important because in this list, when I'm going at a big target like a vehicle or a monster or something like that, I really need to be able to reroll 1s because I'm going to be overcharging my ion blasters, and I don't want my guys to be taking mortal wounds or missing. So having guys that hit on 2s, rerolling 1s is extremely powerful. Even against flyers, I'm hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s, which is just fantastic. Like statistically, this army, if I don't lose any guys, can kill 2 Storm Ravens in 1 turn with tons of wounds to spare, and that's before even going into the drones or anything. So like the amount of firepower I could bring to bear that's accurate and wounds most things in the game on a 2 or a 3 for what the gun is supposed to fire at is very high, and that's what you want for a shooting army. So like my burst cannons are wounding chaff, which is like Marines, guards, stuff like that, orcs on 3s, and then my ion blasters are wounding more elite stuff on 3s, and then even most vehicles on 3s because I can overcharge it. So like when I was playing the game, Tervagons are toughness 8. So since I was able to overcharge, I was able to win them on 4s instead of the 5s that the missile pods would have done. And with the missile pods, I think I would have struggled a lot more to take those monsters out. Same thing for like shooting the knights, shooting the land raiders, battle wagons with ARD cases. There's going to be a lot more things than people think initially that are going to be toughness 8. Like Tervagons, probably going to see very few Tyranid lists without at least 1 Tervagon, just because the package with the Termagants is so good for the points. So yeah, the list is extremely simple in terms of what it looks to do. It's very honed, very focused. Some people have suggested that I have each suit be like a specialist. So some suits have 3 burst cannons, some suits have 3 cyclic ion blasters, etc. I don't like that because the army is somewhat fragile. While I can shunt wounds to the drones, and all my suits are characters, so you can't shoot them unless they're the closest thing, which is kind of funny once you get through the drone screens. you can, with a canny opponent who has a good list, has some maneuverability, has some deep strike, stuff like that, you could be able to pick off some of the commanders that are more effective against your army. So if I'm playing against someone that's like no vehicles but a lot of infantry, like my orc list, they would want to go after my burst cannon commanders. Whereas if I was playing against an armored, like an armored company or something, they would want to go after my cyclic ion blaster commanders. So I like having them spread out. All the guns have the same range, anyways, so it's not like I have this contingent that's kind of more in the front and one that's like more in the back. They all kind of play in the midfield. So I think it's better to have them all be carbon copies and not really give my opponent any room to weaken my shooting output against whatever they happen to bring. So that's my stance on that. I was also suggested to take fusion blasters by a lot of people. I don't think fusion blasters are good in this type of list. My reasoning is that it's really easy to bubble wrap the things that fusion blasters want to go after. As people get more familiar with 8th edition, it's going to become very obvious that you need chaff. You cannot take a list that's all business, as I like to call it, all things that are focused on, like, killing your opponent, stuff like that. You need these screening units. Even if you're playing pure Marines, you have to take something like scouts, or maybe like, stop playing pure Marines, drop some conscripts in there, something like that. And with those, it's really easy to set the line of engagement up so that you can't deep strike in range of the fusion blasters in order to be able to shoot them either at half range or in some cases even period, depending on what army they're going into. Now, obviously, the cyclic ion blaster has the same range as the fusion blaster, but it is a much more powerful all-around gun. So, like, if I'm shooting at infantry, I would get one shot with the fusion blaster and probably paste a guy because of the AP. But with the ion blaster, I get 3 shots and I can kill more guys. So it's more of an all-comers gun, and that's what I think is important for this list. If I was playing a more generalized Tau list with like stealth suits and things like that, sure, we'll throw some fusion blasters in there. But this kind of list doesn't need that particular gun. I need to be able to deal with everything at all times, pretty much, or I'm gonna have some issues. I took all gun drones because I don't think marker light drones they're just not accurate enough, really, and this list doesn't need more than 1 or 2 marker lights per turn. Every turn that I played in this game, I was putting marker lights on the 2 most important things I wanted to kill. So the first turn it was on both of the Flyrants. After that I was putting them on the Turvagon and like an infantry unit, and then I just kept going through like that. So I'm not always going to have the reroll 1s on everything that I need to shoot, but I'm going to have it on the most important targets that I'm going to be focusing on until they die anyways. So after that, whatever I kill is kind of like a bonus. It's very rare that I'm going to have to, deal with like my opponent's entire army. My army's pretty fast. I have fly, so I can take some charges and then just get out of dodge without, taking too many wounds or anything. So it's not like I have to, table everything that comes my way in most games. And then, some armies are very elite, so they're not even going to present that many targets to me, which the marker lights are, my volume of marker lights is not going to have a problem with. So yeah, that's kind of my thought process for the list. I think this is one of the more competitive builds for Tau. I haven't spent too much time theory crafting them, but the commander spam is definitely extremely powerful. Some people have been playing crisis suit spam. I don't think that's as good. Crisis suits just aren't cheap enough compared to commanders for what they give you, which is like, a little when you put it out over a list, they give you some extra wounds, a little bit of extra guns because they can only take 3 guns and or support systems compared to the commander can take 4, and then some more bodies, obviously, which if you're playing full crisis suits, the amount of bodies you're going to get isn't that really meaningful compared to what the commander spam gives you. The other list I think is really good is what are they called, hammerhead spam. So if you take the long strikes with hammerheads, I believe the long strikes are worded in such a way that their buff stacks. I don't remember that exactly, but when I was reading it, the wording seemed to me like the buff stacks. And right now, by rules as written, same name buffs do stack. I expect that to be FAQ'd for things like the Dark Shroud, Dark Angel Landspeeder, where you can have an unshootable army. So it's pretty clear they're probably going to get rid of that. But for now, it is rules as written, so you can have an army of hammerheads that all hit on 2s and are pretty much immune to small arms fire because they're all vehicles. Their guns are good at, like, they can have two different turrets, so you can take railguns with some munitions, or you can take the ion cannon, so you can be really good at killing a variety of targets, just like my commander list is. And then you could take smart missile systems, which I think are a lot better than drones because they'll reduce your kill points and that you'll get a lot more work out of them. Although the drones are cheaper, so it kind of depends. Your mileage may vary. The drones also can absorb charges, and they don't have to disembark from the hammerhead until they want to, I believe. So you can just keep them on there, and I think they're unshootable. Again, I don't have the codex in front of me, so I don't remember. But yeah, that's a really good list. And then with the Forge World Xenos book that came out, there's some Hammerhead variants that can do a couple other jobs that maybe the normal Hammerhead would struggle with. So yeah, I expect to see that too. I made a list for it, and like you can fit in a whole bunch of Hammerheads. They're actually not even very expensive, which I was shocked for. Like they're comfortably under 200 points if I remember. So you could just fill up the board with them, and a lot of armies are really going to struggle with that because, like I said, they're effectively immune to small arms fire. They're toughness 7 with like a 3+ save, I think. And then you just can focus down your opponent's big guns, and it's a really good kind of spam rock paper scissors list. But it's presenting one thing to your opponent, but you can deal with multiple things, and those are the type of lists I like. If you've looked at my Green Tide army, it's all infantry, but I can kill vehicles, I can kill infantry, I can do a lot of things. So I'm presenting one type of target to my opponent, but I can deal with all the types of targets my opponent is presenting me. That's the same thing that this commander list is supposed to do. Although it's not the same extent, commanders certainly aren't immune to small arms fire. They are resilient against it because it will usually wound them on 5s, and they have a 3+ save and quite a few wounds. But it's a little softer of a counter. But yeah, that's my list. So switch gears to the game now. The game was obviously very one-sided. I commented during it that it felt a lot like a tower defense game because the Tyranids were just coming at me with like wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, and I just kept killing all of it as it came. I think that's one of the problems that my opponent had is he came at me in waves, which is exactly what a gunline loves to see. Gunlines love it when you come at them piecemeal, so they can just focus on the closest things and then deal with threats as they come, and that's exactly what happened to me. I was really surprised at the output that my army was able to do. I mean, I was able to kill 4 monstrous creatures in 1 turn with some shots to spare. Like I was throwing gun drone shots that weren't doing anything. They're not going to do much against those targets. And then I was throwing some burst cannons into the Tyrannocyte because I thought that when it drops a profile, it gets worse at shooting, which I should have known that it doesn't because it hits on 5s already, and typically things that hit on 5s don't get worse as they degrade. So I even had shots to spare. And then, yeah, I was able to kill a Moloch, a Hive Tyrant, a Carnifex, all from full, and then a Hive Tyrant that had already taken 3 damage because of a charge that he probably shouldn't have tried. I think he needed like a 10 or something. But I mean, that's a lot of damage. Like I was really impressed with the amount of damage that the cyclic ion bursters could do, or ion, yeah, whatever, cyclic ion somethings, cannons. But yeah, so that was, and then the game just kind of repeated. The next turn, he moved up with his Gribblies and the monstrous creatures. I took out one of the Tervagons. I took out the Termagants. Again, there's nothing that can threaten me. He has to run everything. He does so. I kill it. And then the last turn of the game, he just had a Tervagon left and some Zoanthropes, and my whole army focused them down. I mean, I did more wounds to my own commanders than he did to my commanders because of overcharging into some targets that didn't have marker lights on them, or I think one guy like rolled a 1 twice in a row. That's a complete shellacking, basically. Now, that's not indicative of what my army is going to do every time, but we'll talk about that a little bit. So, yeah, like I said, first thing was he came at me in waves. I think that the Tyranids should have played a little bit more reserved, so left the Moloch in reserves until turn 2, left the Carnifex in reserves until turn 2, moved the Flyrants to hopefully hide them a little bit. He could have hidden one behind that little Coke can piece of terrain that we had. I didn't set up this table. If I did, I would have put more line of sight blocking terrain into it because I think that's, even if I'm playing a gun line, I want the game to be fair. And 8th edition, you really need line of sight blocking terrain. He only had one very small piece that he could hide behind, and that's just not good enough for Tyranids. But he could have, tried to make use of it even with what he had, and maybe come forward a little bit, or pull a little bit on the flanks some more to spread me out. And to try to kill those. And then I think my first turn would have been significantly less devastating. Obviously, I wouldn't have been able to kill the Moloch and the Carnifex because they wouldn't have existed yet. I probably would have still been able to kill the 2 Flyrants. I'm sure I could have gotten line of sight to them with enough stuff and all that, and with having so many extra guns, I mean, to kill those other 2 monstrous creatures, they probably would have gone down. But with the positioning, I think he could have maybe at least come forward a little bit, and then from there his turn 2 would have been much better. So both of the Termagant units would be, easily in range to shoot. He could have wiped out a lot of my gun drones because the Termagants were really good at killing gun drones with the armament that they had. And then he could have done some charges with the Carnifex, maybe getting into one of my commanders actually, maybe killing one of those. The Moloch could have came up and then, put wounds on the commanders instead of getting screened a little bit by the drones because his range for his mortal wounds is kind of small. Things like that where the reserves could have had more impact had they waited to come down as opposed to just dropping right away where they did nothing and then gave me a whole bunch of targets. And that's where I think the game really turned, is like that turn 1, I was able to kill, I think, like a third of his army in points. I didn't add it up, but it was just so much. And I was like, at that point, I knew the game was over. I was like, there's no way that what's left can kill the stuff that I have. Like, it's just not going to happen. And then the whole game, I was rolling 3 shots per burst cannon, and I forgot that they were Edge Assault 4, just to make matters even worse. I missed like 20 or 30 shots, or no more than that, like 40 shots over the course of the game that I should have been entitled to, just to kind of add insult to injury, I guess. That's just my mistake. So yeah, that's probably the early game really dictating how the game was going to go, because the Tyranid army was just trying to be aggressive in a way that it couldn't have been. Like I said, when I was looking at the lists, some of the things in the army don't work unless you're playing a really aggressive list. So like Molochs, for example, I like a lot more if you have more things that are coming out of reserve that are chargers. So if you're doing like the adrenal glands, the big bug, I forget its name, where it can bring a unit with it. So like the adrenal glands on that, and the Hormagaunts, adrenal gland things in pods. Then you can have the Flyrants, stuff like that, to throw more threats in your opponent's face. And I think an army like that would actually do pretty well against what I was bringing, because it's just, at that point, it is a lot of target saturation. And I think that's one of the cooler Tyranid builds. I actually hope somebody does that. Or some guaranteed pressure, like a Swarm Lord in a pod who can charge if he gets Onslaught off, or has okay odds at charging even if he doesn't get Onslaught off. Things like that would have made me position a little bit differently, think a little bit differently, stuff like that. So yeah, the list is just a little unfocused in terms of how it comes at you. Like I said, generally coming at somebody in waves with any type of army just doesn't work out. Like when I play my Orcs, everything's moving up at the same speed. So we don't get there in waves, we get there in one wave, and then you have to deal with my whole army. Instead of, I give you these 2 units, and I give you these 2 units, and I give you these 2 units. It's just not an effective way to build a list, in my opinion, in most situations, especially for an assault army. I made a lot of positioning mistakes this game. Initially, I did not put drones in front of my commanders, which is something I need to focus on, because otherwise I can be charged by things coming in from Deep Strike, which is very common now, and then that can really put me on the back foot. There's a lot of very powerful things that can come in from Deep Strike, like Terminators, monstrous creatures in pods, like the Tyranid player had, just all kinds of stuff, and I need to make sure that the drones are up there to take the hit when that is the case. Now, I did deploy well initially to prevent any Deep Strike from coming in behind my lines, which is something that I need to do. This army is never really going to spread out. It's always going to be pretty castled up, and so I don't want anybody to get behind me, but then if they get in front of me, I need to be able to have them get into the drones, and then it's like, okay, you killed a unit of 2 drones or whatever with this charger, and then I can just shoot them out from there. I also need to spread out the drones a little bit so that it is hard to multi-charge them. If a unit, like an actual unit, comes down, like Salt Marines or something like that, that can get into them. I don't want to lose more drones than necessary. I want my opponent to have to get as little as possible, and then come into my lines. That's kind of how this list works. Is it's very attrition based using the drones. The drones are they don't put out much offense, but they're very very important for defense. They allow me to put wounds from the commanders onto them. They block charges, stuff like that. So I need to learn how to position them a little bit better. I also had the Cold Star with the drone controller. Nowhere near my drones for like the first 2 turns, which is not a good idea, because making them hit on 4s is actually reasonable. I don't know if I'll continue to run the Cold Star. I might downgrade him to just a regular commander and then put the points into taking more drones on the Fireblades, just because I'd rather have more drones than a guy who can move fast and has items that I don't really care about. Like, the moving fast is good because he can get to an objective late game from pretty much anywhere on the board, but my whole army moves 8 and then can advance at almost no cost because all their guns are assault, and then I move from hitting on 2s to hitting on 3s, and I'm probably still going to have marker light support, so it's not that much of a change. And then in most games, the objectives are kind of midfield, whereas in this mission, they're in your deployment zone, so they're kind of like buried in the back. I don't think that's going to something that's going to happen a lot. So that's why I'm not super sold on the Cold Star. Although it does kind of depend on what form the missions take on. So like if people start playing more Maelstrom missions, like the ITC guys were talking about, incorporating that stuff into their actual rules pack, then being able to redeploy really easily is more powerful because the Cold Star not only advances 20, but he just moves 20. That's really good. So just some minor things that I might tweak there, because the drone controller is a pretty small aura, and then it's really meant for like marker lights to make them hit on 4s, not getting a bunch of gun drones within range. But the Fireblades do give the gun drones extra shots because they have pulse carbines. So the extra shots plus them hitting on 4s is really powerful. That's something else I forgot to use this game, was having the drones in range of the Fireblades for the most part, and then even when they were in range, I just forgot that was that rule because it's the first time I played the army. So in the future, that'll be good because having some more strength 5 guns to shoot out is just really good against certain armies, like orcs or Tyranids, stuff like that, where you can thin out a little bit of the chaff and leave the commanders to do more important work elsewhere. So yeah, those are the main takeaways I had from the game. The army shoots really well. It plays just as I expected it to when I was going through the theory crafting process. I was doing lots of like dice simulations on common targets like toughness 7 3+, toughness 4 3+, toughness 3 5+, a lot of things like that, and finding what like the expected amount of damage is, and it lived up to the expectations. I actually didn't run that many simulations for like a lot of monstrous creatures and stuff like that because that's not super common, but it handled it completely fine. The thing I love maybe the most about the army is that it could put so much into reserves. So it has a lot of drops, and it's probably going to be disadvantaged to go first. Like I said in the battle report, I'm going to try to play with ITC rules more because I think they're just more fair. So I'll always have a shot then. My opponent will usually get the +1, but I'll at least have a chance. But the army just beta strikes like a champion because it could put 7 suits in reserves, and they can come down wherever. Like this game, I came down with my other guys because I wanted to castle up and make my opponent come to me. But in the future, it's like, I'm going to have 7 extremely deadly characters who you can't interact with and can come down and then get to punch you first. And that's going to be so good against like vehicles, against Devastator squads, things like that typically get left behind a little bit even once the game begins. And I can just come down and then wipe them out and put my opponent really between a rock and a hard place. It also makes being able to deploy around my opponent a lot easier because my first 7 drops are just commander in reserve, commander in reserve, commander in reserve, and then they have to usually at least put down a few things that matter. Typically people have a couple reserve units themselves, but they'll have to show at least some of their cards, and that'll give me an idea of where other things are going to go. So like maybe they put down a chaff unit. I know, okay, that's probably going to bubble wrap this important vehicle, or something like that, and I can make some educated decisions from there. So that's a really really cool part of the army. So yeah, I mean takeaways for me is if you are looking at the Tyranid perspective, definitely need to not come in waves at a gun line, and then probably make some of the changes I talked about in the army list section of the battle report, where you know either just focus up the list a little. It's not like it was a bad list. It just could use some optimization, like almost any other army, where it's like, okay, what do I really want this list to do? Am I more of a shooting Tyranid army? Am I more of a super in your face Tyranid army? What's going on here? Like I get the feeling he wanted to be a little more shooting. He seemed to really like the Termagants. He liked being able to have access to smite and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, great. Take the drop pod out, take the Carnifex out, take the Mawloc out, get the wings off these Hive Tyrants, or probably just drop the Hive Tyrants entirely, and then get like an Exocrine or two in there. Get some like warriors with guns for Synapse. Drop those Zoanthropes because they're just kind of bad, to be honest. And then you can make some changes like that would focus up the army a little bit. We also talked about the Malanthrope from Forge World. It's basically just better than Venomthropes. Like it costs, I think, pretty much the exact same points as a unit of 3 Venomthropes, and it can cover pretty much the same area because it has a larger base. But it's another Synapse creature. It's a Psyker. It's a character, so it can't be shot, whereas the Venomthropes can easily be shot, and they're really not that tough, to be honest. Like, their -1 to hit is their defense. I just kind of ignored them this game because I was dealing with things that their aura didn't even affect. But yeah, Malanthrope is like shockingly better than a Venomthrope. I really question if Forge World stuff should be allowed in tournaments, because the Forge World books are just so poorly written and they seem poorly balanced. Like, most of their stuff is bad, but some of the things are just like head scratchers. Like, why wouldn't you ever take this? Like, a Malanthrope is almost an auto include in a Tyranid army unless you're playing Nidzilla or something. And then like there's an Orc entry, the Warboss on a bike, who's almost strictly better than a regular Warboss on a bike for like 6 points more. It's like you shouldn't have auto include things in a Forge World book. That's one of the reasons I've always hated Forge World, is like their stuff gets really silly and sometimes it can be really unbalanced. So I personally wouldn't mind if Forge World was not a thing in the competitive scene for 40k, but we'll see how it goes. They definitely need to clean up their indexes because they're just horribly written. They have so many typos and things like that. And then from my side of things, um, the list is pretty good. Like I said, I might make the Cold Star change to it, but I definitely need to tighten up that positioning as far as making sure my drones are in the right place at the right time, and then continuing to focus on having multiple targets for all my suits and things like that. That's one of the I found that really rewarding while I was playing, is that while the army probably looks really point and click, I don't think it will be as much in future games. But one of the important things is making sure that you're in range enough, because a canny opponent, if I just put my guys barely within 18 inches, to maximize being able to stay back or something like that, they're just going to remove casualties from the front, and then I'm not going to be able to shoot as much. So that's why I was being a little bit more, not aggressive, but a little bit more ready to move up the field and make sure that my guys had, you know, pretty much every single model in a unit that they wanted to kill in range from various commanders, and then making sure that I was doing the commanders in a certain order so that no matter how my opponent pulled casualties, he wasn't going to be able to stop me from shooting, or if something died because I was rolling some hot dice, that my commanders had other targets, maybe not necessarily the best targets for their guns, but it's better than not shooting at all. So that's where I think a lot of the finesse comes from, is being able to play that mid-ranged firefight game and do it well, and then also the very accurate drone placement, because you can't just be like, oh, each commander has 2 drones. Like, no, against a canny player, again, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to kill the 2 drones in front of that commander with bolters or whatever have you, and then I'm going to shoot my las cannon at it, and now it doesn't have any drones in range to put wounds onto, and I can maybe just ace that guy. So you need to be very careful of positioning in terms of making sure that the characters are protected with their character rule. It's a very powerful defensive bonus in this list, because all of my important guys are characters. So if there's any drones that are closer or even any other guys that are closer, they can't be picked out, and then making sure that I have the drones in a protective screen where a lot of them are within 3 inches of every commander until I can start reducing some of that really serious firepower that my opponent might have, which is the usual target that I'll want to focus on. So making sure that those las cans go down, that those other big guns go down. So yeah, I think Tau is really interesting. I really like this list. I think it's really competitive. I would feel comfortable taking it into almost any of the early front runner armies. Maybe not the truly broken ones. Like I don't think I'm going to be able to beat like 500 conscripts with it. I would just get overwhelmed with firepower. I don't think I'd be able to beat several hundred brimstone horrors with it. Um, Although maybe that one I'd have to play because their math is really weird and Smite isn't actually that good against this list. Um, but yeah, the 500 conscripts would definitely. I mean, I don't think anything beats that really, but that's just my opinion. I would take this into 7 Storm Ravens, or however many Storm Ravens is going to end up being the norm, probably 3. So yeah, I mean, I think Tau is. Rumors of Tau's demise are greatly exaggerated. You have to play probably spammier lists than most people might like, but hey, you do what you got to do. I mean, if you want variety, there are definitely armies that play like that, like Marines, Tyranids, stuff like that. That can put out Harlequins. They can put out very competitive, non-spammy lists. I've always liked playing lists that are very copy paste, not because I think spam is good for the game, but because mentally it's a lot easier to know that, okay, I have so many of this thing, so I only have to remember this one profile, and et cetera, et cetera. That's why I like my orc list, because it's just a bunch of boys, and I'm like, I know exactly what they do. It's very, it frees up like mental processing cycles to focus on what your opponent's doing, and then the more minute details of the game, um, which is where people, including myself, definitely struggle. So that's why I've always liked armies personally that are a little more on the spammy side, I guess. But yeah, that's all I have for this week. I will try to probably play another game or two, especially with the 4th of July holiday coming up if you're in the United States. So thank you very much for watching, and as always, I will see you next time.